Phoebe and Snow, Phoebe and Snow, Phoebe and Snow. Two cats ready to go. One's black, one's white. Phoebe and Snow, they know what's right. They hope that their future together is bright. They love to play. They play together every single day, wherever they go. The bond they have will not let go. Phoebe and Snow, Phoebe and Snow, Phoebe and Snow, Phoebe, Phoebe, Phoebe and Snow. Hello, my name is Cale Burnett, and welcome to the 11th episode of Season 1 of Phoebe and Snow, titled The Picnic. This is probably going to be one of my favorite episodes. As well, I also changed the background to have the fall set, as around this time in Catholic, it's mid-October, meaning that the grass has changed and the leaves are falling. So I wanted to give off that fall vibe. I hope that you enjoy it. Anyway, but basically, let's kick off with the story. So the story starts off with Phoebe in her room on a Saturday morning. Overall, things are really peaceful. It's incredibly peaceful because Margaret is doing yoga, and Jeff is on the computer doing a few minor things for his work. But Jeff is now a workaholic. Ultimately, it seemed like a peaceful day. Then when the afternoon came, then when 10 o'clock came, Margaret finished up with her yoga, and Jeff finished up with his computer work. And around that time, they ultimately decided to plan a picnic out, but not until first Sunday afternoon. You know what we should have? Said Phoebe. A picnic. Ooh, that sounds good, said Margaret. Indeed it does, said Jeff. And that was that. Anyway, basically, Phoebe loved to have a picnic, but she ultimately wanted to invite some of her friends too. So in the afternoon or lunchtime, Phoebe was just making herself some grilled cheese sandwiches, 2 of them in fact, with Colby Jack cheese and Munster cheese, a perfect combo, and I kind of like to eat that too. I personally think that eating those I really like those cheeses a lot, and sometimes Colby Jack. Colby Jack is like my third favorite cheese ever. Anyway, I like to mind grilled cheese sandwiches. Anyway, enough about that. So ultimately, Phoebe ate some grilled cheese sandwiches for lunch, and then it was ultimately time for her to hang out with Snow for a little bit. So she went outside and closed the door softly. She had to do it to contain her excitement. So basically, she decided to knock on Snow's door. Snow's parents. Hello. Oh, hi. I'd like to see Snow, please. Oh, Snow? She's not here as of now. Uh-oh. That's okay. And basically, at that point, Phoebe walked off. However, so she decided to come to see Edward. And ultimately, he was not there too. Brittany refused. She wondered where they would be. The only contact Phoebe wanted to address was Miss Blank, but ultimately she was somewhere too. Anyway, meanwhile, let's go with Snow, Edward, Brittany's, and then Miss Blank's side. So ultimately, the reason why they were not at home was because they were doing a carnival and the fall fair. And ultimately, the fall fair was going to last until Sunday. Basically, there were a lot of fun things like pumpkin patches, and there were also amusement parks and all that things right there. And ultimately, this sounded pretty good to the 4 cats, the 3 kids and the 1 adult. Basically, Phoebe knew they must have been somewhere. Anyway, so she closed the door softly and was sad with despair. She closed the door to her room and felt very sad. Now in Catville, this time, there was not really communication. I mean, well, at this point there was no phone. So basically, Phoebe could not contact Snow, Edward, Miss Blank, or Brittany. Snow, Edward, Miss Blank, and Brittany. Anyway, but besides that, they might come back tomorrow. Basically, but tomorrow was gonna be the last day, and there was gonna be a huge raffle, and they would win a big prize. An extremely big prize, like cash. It was unclear what it was gonna be, but we might have to find out to see what's gonna happen next. Anyway, Phoebe was in despair, but ultimately cheered up and decided to play with her own toys to make up for the last time that she had with Snow, Edward, Miss Blink, and Brittany. Let's go back to the fall fair. In the middle of October of every year, Capital will hold a fall fair. The fall fair was basically a way to celebrate the coming of fall. And it seemed and to most people, it was probably one of the favorite things that they always look forward to. For example, in the fall fair, there was a lot of competitions. One of them was a pumpkin competition. For example, here's how the pumpkin competition went. Basically, it started at around 1 p.m. and ultimately lasted until 1:15 p.m. So relatively short contest, about 15 minutes long. Basically, here's how it worked. Basically, they were many different pumpkin components, and some of them were deliciousness, taste, smell, sight. So basically, like beauty, taste, and also how much you weight, and also how small it weighed. Basically, almost everyone got a prize. Even those that didn't get nominated would still get a prize, and they'd still win a pretty small amount of money, no more than $20. Anyway, so basically, Ms. Blank had a very small pumpkin, and she ultimately went for the smallest, and she got $20. As well, there was also arts and crafts, and Miss Blank, being a very crafty person, kind of like with Phoebe, she ultimately made a little ceramic. She basically displayed a, a pretty small ceramic pumpkin that she had made many years ago, basically from her times as a little kid, mostly in either elementary school, middle school, or even going as far as high school. Anyway, as well, there was also a lot of fall food. It included pumpkin stew, and some were even getting ready for Thanksgiving, to ultimately be 1 month from there. Anyway, but basically, regardless of it, the fall fair was a very fun way to celebrate. And it was pretty good. No Edward, Miss Blank, and Brittany had a fun time. But they were ultimately curious about Phoebe. Phoebe didn't really have an interest in the fall fair because she ultimately wanted some solitude. I guess that's pretty reasonable for Phoebe. Like, most autistic people like me, like, they like to have solitude when they're tired from a long and weary day. For example, this is why I never really did much extracurriculars. Like, I mostly did Boy Scouts and religious things. But I kind of like that, only doing 1 or 2 at a time, rather than doing like 9 like some people in my high school did. I like that a lot because it gives me solitude, and ultimately it gives me time to reflect and talk to myself about how the day went, and ultimately discuss what went well, what didn't go well, and what could I improve on the next day. So I really liked not really having much extracurriculars, especially in school. Like, there was like sports. I did indoor track, but in middle school I did absolutely none of it. But I'm kind of proud of that because, well, ultimately, my true interest was Boy Scouts, and ultimately I got Eagle Scout at some point, and that was probably the biggest achievement ever, really. I've had quite numerous of them. So ultimately, the fall fair ended at around 4 p.m., and this meant it was time to clean up. The 4 cats, the 3 kids, and the 1 adult, Snow, Edward, Brittany, and then Miss Blank, the adult one, were basically all cleaning up and helping clean up and ultimately helping prepare for the next fall festival. But only the next one after that was going to be the winter festival, a fun festival the week before Christmas. So it would be incredibly good for the little kids. Anyway, but basically, that was ultimately that. Anyway, so around that point, they all went home, and Miss Blank decided to give the cat some rides. But ultimately, Miss Blank, being a very kind and hard teacher, only decided to help the kids get back home to their rides. And basically, that was that, because some of the parents had to go off and do other things. So Miss Blank got into a car and picked up Snow, Edward, and Brittany, and they had a pretty fun time. Basically, Snow got on the right side of the car, Brittany on the left, and yeah. Actually, Snow was on the right, and Brittany's on the left, and Edward was in the middle. I kind of just wanted to revise that because normally I got confused which is the right, which is the left of a car. But ultimately, it's from your perspective. And when it's outside, then it's opposite. That's why I learned in daily life. Ultimately, the car drove off, and that was that. They were all picked up very safely. Anyway, soon after, Phoebe saw Snow, Edward, and Brittany, and also Miss Blank She wanted to confront them, but ultimately, she knew that it was not going to be any time. But actually, at first she didn't want to do it, but then she came out and wanted to talk to the 4 cats. So she rushed outside pretty quickly, and just from the look of the 4 cats, she was already looking like a hot mess. But Phoebe was not having a rough day. Anyway, ultimately, Phoebe went out and confronted the 4 cats. Snow, hey Snow, it's okay if you want to come to a family picnic with us? Well, I can't really. That was also the same for Edward. Sorry, Phoebe, I can't. When he said, I hate to do this, but I can't come. And Miss Blank said, well, I love to, but basically we're gonna go with the fall fair for the last day, because there's something special going on. Then suddenly Phoebe out of nowhere snapped. What? The fall fair? What the heck is that? Oh, it's basically a fair where we're gonna win a huge prize. Maybe you can do. I don't need prizes. I have a lot of things on the way. Basically, Phoebe ultimately didn't want to go. And then she stormed out, and for the first time ever in the series, she actually slammed the door. Oh, she slammed it. Wow. Anyway, but basically, Margaret confronted Phoebe and said what happened. Well, I feel in a bad mood because Snow, Edward, and Miss Blank are gonna come to our family picnic. Family picnic? Well, actually, the picnic's gonna be for us. What? Then Phoebe went back up again and slammed the door again. Oh, Phoebe, stop it. Geez, that girl has a problem, said Jeff. Don't worry. Let her die down eventually, said Margaret. So ultimately they left Phoebe alone, and Phoebe went, crying. This is also the first time in the entire series that we see Phoebe Verbal have a visible meltdown. Anyway, so Phoebe was sobbing, but ultimately, after around 10 to 15 minutes, Margaret came in and confronted Phoebe. Phoebe, it's okay if they don't go, but we still have each other. What do you mean? Well, you see, it's totally okay if they don't want to go. I mean, I'm not to plan for this picnic to go specifically with us, so it's okay for you to. It's totally okay for you to. It's totally okay for you to invite them, but ultimately, I want this to be especially for us. Maybe we can do a bigger picnic sometime soon. Okay, sounds good, said Phoebe. And Margaret didn't slam the door, of course, but she closed it softly, like very softly. Anyway, but ultimately, Phoebe calmed down eventually, and they had dinner. For dinner, they had sloppy joes, and that was that. Anyway, but now let's get into Sunday, the picnic. Ultimately, the Sunday morning felt exactly like Saturday morning. Of course, Margaret did her yoga as always, and Jeff was doing things on the computer. Anyway, then when it came time for around 10 to 10:30, maybe even 11 a.m., they all decided to join together and start making their own lunches. Basically, they went to Cat Food's grocery store, founded in 1896. Basically, Cat Tooth was a grocery store that was colored in green and white. This is also the first appearance ever of Two's, and which is a grocery store, of course. It'll also make an appearance in another episode called Shopping, but I don't think that's in episode 14. But basically, we went to Two's. We had thousands of items of food, and was relatively big. Two's was like a super huge supermarket / grocery store. So they bought things. So they bought new things. They bought new bread and mayo. So maybe even horseradish, because Margaret liked horseradish, but Phoebe did not. She thought it tasted bitter, and she did not like the taste. It tasted very gross to her. Anyway, and ultimately, they got all the things that they want, lettuce, tomatoes, and all that. They checked out, and it was around $50. Actually, they checked it out, and it was actually around $50. I think I said $50 too much too. I think I overestimated that, but basically it was about $30, and so we paid for it. Then the next thing that they did when they came home was make the sandwiches. And ultimately, they packed along a picnic basket. And that was pretty good. Anyway, so they packed along a picnic basket, and that was that. They put all the food there, and they ultimately decided to drive off. They drove off to Cathedral Park, which was a relatively long ways away. Basically, it wasn't really there until around 20 minutes in. It was a relatively long drive though. But they finally came, and they got picnic, and they got the picnic basket as well as a picnic blanket. It was ultimately a red and white checkerboard blanket, and ultimately that's where they had their lunch on. And they tried their best not to get it wet or ruin it that much, but ultimately they could watch it in the driving. So the next thing they did was simply unpack the food. Basically, Phoebe got her food, Margaret and Jeff their food, and they also put out some sides and some little snacks and cake. It was a relatively big picnic, and Margaret and they all figured that they didn't want to eat all of it, but it would come for extra, and ultimately Phoebe could pack that into her lunch for tomorrow, since tomorrow was Monday, and Monday's at school. But basically, they ultimately ate their lunch, and that was that. However, while they were eating their lunch, it started to cloud up a little bit. Ooh, that can't be good. And the sky was relatively white or gray. And it was ultimately starting to rain a little bit. And then it came pouring down. Ooh, we gotta get out there, quick. So they ultimately quickly got up the blanket and their food. Anyway, so basically, they ultimately got their food, and it got a little bit wet, but thankfully they all put it in baggies, so it was not really per se, quietly, but it was not spoiled, soggy, or rotten eggs. ultimately they never got a prize. But basically they might, but something soon might happen. Basically, then at that point, the furball family arrived back at their home, and they went into their garage, and with their garage, actually, and the cookies, they didn't have a garage actually, they just had a sidewalk. So you put on the pavement, sidewalk or pavement, and basically from there, they quickly ran inside and quickly closed the door, but not slamming it, of course. Ultimately, the picnic was canceled. We had an idea to do a picnic inside, so she basically put the blanket on the floor, which may be scary, but she actually put on a rug, and from there, she unpacked the food and decided, bon appetit, let's eat. Inside, that is. Ooh, that sounds good, said Morgan. Yep, here we go, said Jeff. And so ultimately, they had picnic inside, and that was that. As for the fall fair, basically, the fall fair was basically had a raffle, and the raffle was basically for a brand new art set. And the reason why the art set was there was because it would be good for anyone who liked pumpkins. And ultimately, actually there was an art set, a very advanced art set consisting of hundreds or even hundreds or even possibly thousands of art materials all at once. Then there came a new cooking pot, more like basically like a grill per se, like a cooking pot and cooking utensils. And for the third prize, it was ultimately the third prize was basically the third prize was basically like, it was basically, I honestly don't know what the third prize should be. Actually, it will be, anyway, and the third prize was basically a bunch of books and a little home library. Sorry, I took so long to think about that. Anyway, but basically the third prize was a little library. So the first prize was an art set, second cooking, and third books. Ultimately, everyone had put names in the raffle before the rain started. And ultimately, here's how it went. Basically, Edward won the third prize, which was a book set. Won the cooking, and basically, which is the second prize. And Phoebe ultimately won the first prize. So basically, however, Phoebe was not there. So ultimately, when the sun came out, or basically when it started to be sunny and cloudy at the same time, Snow, Edward, Brittany, and Miss Blank knocked on Phoebe's door, and Phoebe answered, and her parents were there to protect her. Hey Phoebe, sorry that, but I hope I enjoyed this. And so she offered Phoebe a 1,000-piece art set. Wow, thank you so much. I know, I think you deserve it. Sorry we could not attend your picnic. Oh, that's okay, but basically, I think my picnic went really well. Even inside, would you like to join us? Oh sure, sorry that we couldn't join earlier, but we'd be more than happy to. Alright, come on in, and bon appetit. So ultimately, Phoebe, Snow, Margaret, Jeff, Miss Blank, bringing Edward, ultimately joined together for a big picnic, an inside picnic in fact, and that's where they eat food and stuff like that. It was practically it was one of Phoebe's best picnics, and this was one of her best Sundays ever. And ultimately, it was one of the most memorable parts of her life. Anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this episode of Phoebe and Snow, and stay tuned for Season 1, Episode 12, In the Dark. It's going to be a very spooky episode. Anyway, I hope that you enjoyed. And take care. And as always, I'm the Soul Creator, Kale Burnett. Anyway, and take care, and I hope that you enjoyed this episode so much. Anyway, take care, and sincerely, Kale Burnett.